Are Ryan Day, Jim Harbaugh, and other head coaches properly rated in CBS Sports top 25 Power 5 coach rankings? Today I'm going to be discussing a top 25 list of Power 5 head coaches presented by Tom Fornelli on CBSSports.com. The article link will be down below. And in summary, basically, Tom Fornelli explains some of his thoughts on these top 25 head coaches. I'm not going to be doing that. Rather, I'm going to be listing off the order of each coach in the top 25 list and explaining my thoughts on their rankings, and mainly talk about the placement of these coaches and what I think in the end, along with some extra thoughts on Ryan Day and Jim Harbaugh's rankings, because I think that where these two fall is rather interesting. So to start off, we have PJ Fleck at number 25. He fell 10 spots from last year, which I think is pretty unfair, especially seeing that a 3-4 record in the Big Ten with a nullified home field advantage would probably equate to an 8-5, 9-4 regular season, which would rather be considered a success, though maybe a disappointment at Minnesota. At number 24, you have David Shaw. I have no clue why he is still in the top 25. His program has been on a roller coaster ride downhill ever since 2015 and 16, especially noticing that 4-8 season in 2019, and I'm even more astonished that he was ranked 19th last year. At number 23, you have Jim Harbaugh, who fell 11 spots after a 2-4 season last year. I'm pretty shocked that he was still in the top 15 last year. This is a well-deserving hit, especially with all the hype around Milton and the hype around the team in general after they destroyed Minnesota, who at the time was ranked in the top 25, and then following up with a 1-4 record after that Minnesota game. I think it's very well deserved that Jim Harbaugh fell to 23rd. But similarly to David Shaw, the program is on a downward trend, and I'm almost disgusted and I'm quite frankly livid to see my head coach in the top 25 when he has won us nothing. On to number 22, you got Mark Stoops. This makes perfect sense. Not much to talk about here. He's been pretty consistent and got Kentucky a 10-win season and a top 25 finish in the coaches and AP polls. Number 21, you have Herm Edwards, and Tom Fornelli makes a pretty good comparison that Herm Edwards was met with kind of anger at his hiring, while Jim Harbaugh was met with excitement, and here we are with Herm Edwards ahead of Jim Harbaugh in the rankings, and Herm Edwards' best season was the same record as Harbaugh's second worst season, 8-5. And really, I do understand why Herm Edwards is up here. He looks to really be prepared to have a great year, and he was not in the top 25 rankings last year either. But he looks to have a great year this year, assuming that sanctions don't can everything from recruiting violations, but those are still uncertain at this time. So in my opinion, he still deserves to be in the top 25. Tom Allen at 20, jumping 26 spots from 46th in the country. What he's done at Indiana thus far is amazing. And if he gets just a 10-win season, if he just goes 10-3, which is what a lot of great teams dread to do, he will be hailed a hero at Indiana. If he goes 10-3 or even 9-4 and higher, it would be like last season, their best season in several decades. I completely respect him being up here, and if he follows this up with at minimum an 8-5, 9-4 season next year, I think he should climb even further. Number 19, you have Gary Patterson, who dropped 3 places in the rankings. He got a winning season last year, probably one of his better seasons last year since 2017, but I understand why he slid down, because his program seems to be moving in the wrong direction. He was number 8 in 2019, dropped to to number 16, last year in the 2020 rankings, and now is 19th in the 2021 rankings. His teams have not been Big 12 contenders since 2017, nor do I think they will be a Big 12 contender this year in 2021. 18, you have Paul Chryst. I think this is very underrated. I think Paul Chryst is a better coach than 18. However, after a 4-3 season last year, if he doesn't, in my opinion, he doesn't get 11 or 12 wins, this is a rightful spot for him to be at. Number 17, you have Kirk Ferentz. Similar story, except I think this is a more accurate rating here. He's on one of his better runs at Iowa. I mean, a 10-3 season last year, and then this 6-2 record in 2020, if you add in regular season games and maybe a loss at a non-conference Iowa State rivalry, who was a very good team last year as well, they'd probably get a 9-4, 10-3 season again, which is quite amazing for Iowa's talent and for their tradition. So I think this ranking for Kirk Ferentz is perfect. Number 16 is Mario Cristobal, who jumped 8 places despite having 3 losses, which I find almost frightening that he jumped this high, but also frightening that he was ranked so low in 2020 after having a good 12-2 season at Oregon. He hasn't gotten to the playoffs yet, but I do, in all honesty, in the next 5 years, I do expect Oregon to make the playoff at least once. Accurate rating to a certain degree. Number 15, you have Mike Gundy, and I honestly think that this is I really don't know what to say. I think he's reached his ceiling here, and I don't understand why he was ranked 13th in 2020, and then he went 8-3 and had one of his better seasons in a while and dropped. I understand that they were very hyped last year, and I was kind of behind that, but at the same time, dropping him 2 places and having one of his better seasons just doesn't make sense to me. Kyle Whittingham at 14th, very underrated head coach in general, but I do like this ranking. He has been very consistent at Utah, and despite not winning a conference championship in the Pac-12, he's won 3 Pac-12 South titles. He's kind of like the Paul Chryst of the Pac-12 South, in my opinion. Number 13, James Franklin. I don't think he should be this high after last year. He was in the top 10 in 2020, which the fact he was ranked ahead of Paul Chryst and Kyle Whittingham kind of bothers me to a certain degree. But number 13, despite that I think it's a little too high, it is far better than in the top 10, especially after last year. Mac Brown at 12 when he was 20th last year. 8-4 following up 7-6. Their team is trending in the right direction for sure, but number 12 for him only being back for 2 years I think could be a little high. Similar with number 11 with Ed Orgeron. And really Ed Orgeron here, I mean, 5-5 following a national title kind of gives me that feeling like Gene Chizik. A 5-5 SEC record, I'd say, would translate to an 8-5 and 9-4 regular season, which people probably were expecting last year if they had a standard regular season. His drop from 4th, though, I don't understand. I mean, I get that he won a national title, and that's great and all, but to have him ranked 4th in 2020, you have to give a little wiggle room. And then to have him drop 7 places is kind of unfair. It's similar to, in my opinion, just similar to Mario Cristobal. You get them, except Mario Cristobal's the opposite. Mario Cristobal kind of underachieved last year, jumped 8 places because he won his conference. Doesn't win his conference and has the same record, he probably stays around the same. LSU has a very tough season last year because they don't return a lot of returning starters, and that just results in Ed Orgeron's coaching rating falling off a cliff. Now, I'm diving a little deep in here because I think Ed Orgeron is kind of overhyped in general. However, him going up to number 4 is kind of unfair to him because you're setting these super high expectations and not taking in consideration other factors, and then dropping him 7 spots because of a weird COVID season after he won a national title. It seems that despite all the hype that like CBS Sports and 24/7 and a lot of others give him, it seems like their analysts are also disrespecting the head coach and are more favoring LSU simply because of their name. Just my opinion. Number 10, Dan Mullen. Absolute perfection. Mullen is certainly a top 10 head coach in my opinion. Wins the SEC East but dropped 2 spots, and that's mainly because Matt Campbell and Pat Fitzgerald, who are 9 and 8th, had spectacularly good seasons. And up to Matt Campbell, Iowa State's in its best spot they've ever been in, perfect rating for 9th, and he jumped 16 spots. Pat Fitzgerald at 8th, he jumped 13, not dropped, jumped. Same thing with Matt Campbell. Sorry about messing that up. Pat Fitzgerald, really, he's been good for a while, and I don't get why CBS finally caught on to that, but he won a second division title in 3 years at Northwestern, and that, I think, changed all the perspective, and he beat an SEC opponent in their bowl game, and they finished top 10 in the polls. And that's absolutely amazing for Northwestern if you know their football history. Not historically a great football team, similarly to Indiana. Fitzgerald has squeezed every single ounce of potential out of this program for now. And I say for now because he's not an old guy by any means. He still has a few more years, if not more, left in him. And it would be exciting if they could finally win a Big Ten championship in the future. Kirby Smart at 7th, he dropped 1, and that makes sense. They got blown out by a Florida team that was honestly a 4-loss Florida team with no defense and got destroyed by them, along with getting humiliated by Alabama in one half of football. It makes sense why he dropped this low. They at least have to have an undefeated regular season for me to think Kirby Smart is a top 10 head coach and not just a top 10 recruiter whose recruits and staff keep him together in the SEC race. Number 6, Jimbo Fisher. Now, despite the fact that Jimbo has some questions surrounding him about Florida State's program, at this point here, seeing what he's done at A&M so far, I can only assume that he is ahead of Kirby Smart right now at this moment. He's won a national title. A&M doesn't have the division advantage placement that Georgia has, nor the recruiting. And last year he only had 1 loss to Alabama, who was one of the greatest teams of all time, and dominated in the end a North Carolina team who had Sam Howell. So I respect this pick. Brian Kelly at 5th. I don't really get this. Fornelli does say there was a time when fans could complain that Notre Dame was constantly overrated. Now that is not the case. Well, I can't necessarily agree here because they've not won a New Year's Six Bowl yet. They've been to the playoff only to not have any kind of competition in the playoff. They still have to prove their worth, and they could do that by making their schedule harder, like scheduling Michigan every year, and as that's a rivalry, that's why I mentioned that, would really help their case, in my opinion. But Brian Kelly is certainly a top 15 coach, and despite the fact that I think maybe Jimbo Fisher, Kirby Smart, Pat Fitzgerald, Matt Campbell could be ahead of him, maybe even Mullen, but Brian Kelly is certainly a top 15 head coach, and he has the Irish trending in a direction they haven't trended in since Lou Holtz was their head coach, and that is certainly a compliment. And then finally, we get to Ryan Day all the way down at 4, and I think this is a completely proper rating. He was ranked 10th in 2020, which is funny because he was behind James Franklin, which I think is heresy. It is absolutely asinine. But I do understand a part of me, despite thinking how asinine that is, does understand because he inherited Meyer's program and Meyer had an awesome recruiting process going, but Ryan Day has just bettered that further. He hasn't lost a regular season game yet, whereas Meyer lost a regular season game every year except 13 and 12, his first 2 years in the program, which Ryan Day's first 2 years in the program so far haven't lost a regular season game. Ohio State is probably the third best program in the country in the past few years, behind Clemson and Alabama, and I think they could surpass Clemson and maybe, when Nick Saban hangs up the headset, become number one under Ryan Day if they continue to trend in this direction and correct some tiny mistakes from last year. Completely accurate rating, and I'm saying this as a Michigan fan, he deserves so far, besides maybe Pat Fitzgerald, to be the number one ranked head coach in the entirety of the Big Ten. And then you have Lincoln Riley at 3rd, Dabo Swinney at 2, and Nick Saban at 1. And there doesn't need to be much explanation on either of these three. Some would like to say Lincoln Riley shouldn't be at 3rd, but he has been at Oklahoma for long enough to where Bob Stoops' recruiting and system no longer gives us an excuse to underrate Lincoln Riley. He did something great on his own last year and the year before that, and the year before that. He's only had 2 losses every season. We have to give him credit where it's due. Overall, looking at this head coach ranking, I'm going to be making my own top 25, but seeing David Shaw and Jim Harbaugh on this list disgust me, and as a Michigan fan, Jim Harbaugh shouldn't even be top 25, merely top 30. Shouldn't happen. How can you rank a man who at most has had 10 wins at a program who constantly gets top 25 or top 10 recruiting classes as the number 23 head coach, let alone the previous year, the 12th? Doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense. He's been here since 2015. And it's the same thing with Franklin. Although Franklin deserves to be on this list because he has won a Big Ten championship and has had 3 11-win seasons. I think Franklin deserves to be on the top 25 list, especially with his success at Vanderbilt. Another coach that I think could be a little overrated personally is Mac Brown. Ed Orgeron, I would still say, is overrated, but him dropping on this list tells me that people are watching him cautiously, unlike the others that I mentioned. People are giving Ed Orgeron a harder time than James Franklin, and that just doesn't make sense to me. And it's the same thing with Oregon. No one gave Oregon a hard time after last season, but a 4-3 season in the Pac-12 just doesn't mean you're that good. Some underrated coaches, I think, are Paul Chryst. Tom Allen, I think, could be a little underrated as well. PJ Fleck, for sure. Kyle Whittingham's pretty underrated. I think Dan Mullen and maybe even Pat Fitzgerald, despite him being 8th. I mean, look at what he's done at Northwestern, despite their truly high academic standards and recruitment at Northwestern. He's done certainly an amazing job there. That's all I really have to say for this video. If you like this video, remember to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell down below. I'm going to be doing a list of top 25 head coaches myself, and I am also going to be releasing my SEC West schedule predictions tomorrow and the championship game predictions the day after that, or 2 days after tomorrow on Friday. So Thursday or Friday for the championship game predictions, tomorrow, Wednesday, for the SEC West schedule predictions. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.